Hey everyone, it's Paul. And this week I wanted to talk about a realization that I had that changed how I saw how my own experience could be used to help others. I've talked about being unhoused when I was 26. That was over 35 years ago. But before 2014, I rarely talked about my homelessness with anyone, especially at work. I was ashamed. I thought if I told people that I'd been homeless, they wouldn't give me opportunities, that they would judge me. I carried that shame until two opportunities came to me in San Francisco. Well, first, I had just joined the board of a music group called the San Francisco Contemporary Music Players. When they announced a partnership with Hospitality House, one of the OG service providers in the Tenderloin. This was the Sound Voice Project, a 6-week series of lessons on new music, think Philip Glass, Steve Reich, that kind of music, that would involve 18 members of the Hospitality House community. I offered to help however I could, and I was excited to be useful again. Getting from my apartment to Hospitality House, which is located in the middle of the Tenderloin, meant walking up the notorious Pill Hill. I look enough like a cop, and my beard was longer in those days, that I was pegged for trouble, and I'm big enough to deter most aggressors on sight, so I was given a wide berth. After a couple of weeks, my passing went without notice, and I started to feel comfortable walking the streets of the Tenderloin. The program was fantastic, led by one of the preeminent teachers and performers in new music named Chris Froh. And my job was to record it all. I was in the back room watching and learning with one of the program directors, Ivan. And as I listened to the stories being told, I started to understand that my own story would be recognized, would be welcome here. The first person I told was Ivan, and his response was, "Me too." And that was it. No explanation offered or required. Ivan introduced me to Joe Wilson and told me the story of how Cecil Williams, the Reverend from Glide, had chosen 2 Tenderloin activists to create complementary organizations. Hospitality House, which Joe helped to create, was intended to be a thorn in the side of the authorities, always advocating for the rights of people in the Tenderloin. Joe was a legend and had returned to Hospitality House to once again be its executive director just a couple of months before I arrived. Ivan told Joe my story in just 4 words. Paul was homeless too, and that's all it took for me to be accepted. A valid question at this point might be, why didn't I just go into social services as a profession? That choice I have to attribute to my first sponsor, Ed, who said, "Keep this for free and for fun, kid. You don't owe anybody anything. Anyone can look good inside these rooms. It's what you do outside that counts. Don't make this your life. The best example of success is for you to go out and do this in society. Learn to be a worker among workers. So go have fun. Give this the first 10% of everything you do and you'll be fine." Thanks, Ed. Eventually, I started to pick up copies of the Street Sheet, the newspaper by and for people experiencing homelessness. I got to know 2 vendors on my way to and from Hospitality House, Sal and Sandy. To guard their dignity, I'm not using their real names. Sal, a tiny, sweet man, stood near the hospitality offices most of the day. And Sandy stood at the top of the Civic Center escalators near my apartment. And here is where I started to learn how to be a better human. I introduced myself to both of them and got to know them a little bit. Sal and I lit up when we saw each other. He told me once that if nobody said his name or talked to him, he could be lost in the voices in his head for days. He wouldn't eat, he would just walk around, and he was rail thin. So I called out his name each time I saw him, and it was a joy to see his response. Sometimes turning on his heel impossibly fast, a mix of startled and joy. We would talk for a minute or 10, and then we'd be on our separate ways. Sandy was different. She was dying, visibly sick, with open sores and jaundice. Our exchanges were quick, and when I could afford it, I would give her enough money to get a room for the night so she could get off her feet. She rarely smiled, and I didn't know if the money I was giving her was helpful. I hadn't been introduced to the concept of a mitzvah yet. But I saw myself in her more than anyone I met on a regular basis, and I just wanted her to be safe. I wanted her to be okay. I was beginning to be cracked open, to find a different way of living, a level of humanity that nobody had ever told me about. I had read all the right books, read about other people's journeys. I'd even gone to Bolivia, which at the time was an amazing experience, but it's nothing compared to what I get now. I was starting to live my own journey. The second opportunity, which I've talked about before, is when I read about this woman, Donnie Sandoval, who was taking old muni buses and turning them into mobile showers. And she said something that just lit me up. She said, it's not about the shower, it's about the dignity. Bells went off, lights went off in my head, and I wrote to her almost immediately and said, look, I am the guy you're talking about, the guy who took a shower this morning, but 25 years later, and here's my story. She introduced me to a term called lived experience, and I didn't even know that was a thing. And that was the beginning of a journey that has been the best 10 years of my life. I want to go back a few years to give some context to what this time meant in my life. After sharing the truth about my using and my moral failings in my life up until that point, my sponsor, Ed, responded with this line. He said, one day your deepest, darkest secrets would be the most powerful tools you're ever going to have to help other people. These are objectively kind words, but they meant little to me in 1991. I tried to be useful, but that promise that Ed made just remained distant, ephemeral. This series of events I'm talking about today is the beginning of that promise becoming a reality. So here's what my journey has shown me. For years, I was unable to look at people who were suffering with any kind of effective empathy. I could take actions to benefit them and the community to which we belonged, but I couldn't effect change. I often felt helpless when people who I loved died from this disease. That failure was terrifying to me because I knew it could be me. I knew it more deeply than any other knowledge I had at that time, and it was an abyss. To defend myself from that terror, I constructed a view of people that required them to move closer to where I was in order to get what I had. If they moved away from that center, from that community, I would distance myself from them. When they died, as they often did, I was protected from feeling too deeply. I had assigned clear measures to success and failure, and those definitions protected me. They also boxed me in. All that started to change. I started to see the potential in people who were just like me. I had come back, and I started to see that they could too. I had to believe that if it was possible for me, it was possible for anyone. I've already talked about the second promise that Ed made to me about the transformation of my secrets into useful tools. Now I want to talk about the first, the one that hooked me. On the night I was introduced to Ed, he ended our rather cursory and one-sided conversation with this. I promise that if you do exactly what I tell you to do, you'll never need to take another drink. Now, I had been a problem drinker since I was 17. It almost cost me my high school diploma, and it definitely scuttled my plans for college. In the process of losing everything in the ensuing years, I had become hopeless. This was a promise of hope. Let me offer you a promise of hope too. We can end homelessness. In my next video, I'm going to talk about some structural and policy changes we can all be advocating for. But ending homelessness doesn't depend on those changes. It depends on us. I know that's a heavy mantle to foist on some of you, but here's another promise. Doing the work of ending homelessness for others will transform you. You might not be able to take this journey without some struggle. Letting go of ideas we once believed were true is hard. Don't be afraid. Anything you do toward this end will help us all. You are an integral part of this success. Now, there's a case for saying I'm also crazy. I quit my job and spent a year building a community tool that everyone likes, but it sits mostly unused. And here I am, as on fire as ever. I know many of you believe as strongly as I do that we can end homelessness. We've talked about this for years. So here's a call to action, a promise of success. Join Second Grace. There are thousands of people like us who believe in this, but until now, we've never had one place we can all gather. Thanks again for watching this latest installment of Letters to the Housed. Talk to you next week.